Okay, just a moment, please.
Okay. So yeah, by way of introduction, while we wait, so I can actually share my screen, I'll briefly talk about, my name is Emigr8, and I actually have 9 years working experience as an IT project manager and currently a managerial coach. I'm working with several companies here in Nigeria and in other parts of the world. Pretty much started off my career with a middle tier size tech firm here in Lagos, Codeville Business Solutions PLC. They are the owners of AutoReg. I worked as a junior project manager for 4 years there, and then I worked with Bincom as a senior product manager for some time, and then I joined HP US, where I worked for a year as the senior Scrum Master. From HP, I then worked with another US company, JobVite, as a project manager product. And I was also consulting for a UK-based company, Nobel Tech. And currently, I work with GitHub. It's a company owned by Microsoft US. I manage the technology partnership programs and related services along those lines. So you can actually look me up on LinkedIn and add me up. I don't know if I can share my screen right now. Yeah.
Yes, you can share your screen, sir.
Okay. So today's topic is on roles in the project lifecycle. And yeah, also I am a certified project manager at Project Management Institute. So that's me in a nutshell and things I've built. I've built over, supported IT teams, so develop over 12 products, both for B2B product, B2C product, SaaS, and all that. So yeah, today's discussion is on roles in the project lifecycle. And yeah, this was supposed to be the slide where I talk about myself. And I also mentor here with Income. I don't know if I talked about that. So today's session is about roles in project lifecycle. And while I was putting together this slide, I then said I needed to first talk about what a project is, because before we even understand what a project lifecycle is, we need to understand what a project is. And essentially, a project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product or service. Product in this case could be anything, all the things we use, like this Zoom is a product, Facebook, Teams, Jira, whatever we use in working, these are all product, right? Some are targeted. So some are products that are built for businesses, some are products that are built for everyday users, right? And for you to build a unique product, right, or service, there's something called project lifecycle. And project lifecycle, as it is a step-by-step framework of best practices used to actually move product from its beginning to its end. It essentially provides structured way. When we say life cycle, it's a structure within building products. Um, it provides structure. It provides a structured way to create, execute, and finish a product. The typical phases in project management lifecycle includes initiation, where at that point you're basically where you conceive to build a product, say fintech solution like social lender or anyone. That's initiation phase. Whatever happens within that phase is within a project life cycle. All right. And basically a number of things happen within the initiation phase, where you do things like feasibility study. Is this product or project, is it going to be feasible? You do viability, is there a market for it? And then there are things called artifacts for each of these phases. When you look at the initiation phase, there are things you want to see and then know that we're in the initiation phase. When you move to the planning phase of a typical project life cycle, um, this is where you actually look at your product or what you plan, your project, and say, oh, we think it's viable. We can start planning on how to build and what do you need. You look at resource needs, you look at budget, you look at risk, you look at schedule, you plan and all that. That is what happens within the planning phase. And then you work on things like design and all that. And then after the planning phase, you look at the execution phase where you actually build. And then while you're executing, you're monitoring and you're controlling, and then there's closeout phase. But then for us this is project management standard. But then for us within the tech industry, I like for us to look at this from a product standpoint, which is why I have project with product, because we're all mobile developers. This framework guides project lifecycle across different industries, be it healthcare, be it construction, be it agri sector. This is a framework that guides project, right? And this life cycle structure. But then when you come down to software product, right? Like the day-to-day products we're using and all, it's slightly different, right? So I'd like to move this back to where we rather call this, let's look at this from the standpoint of software development life cycle, right? Because we're all tech people, there's no point like expanding this and speaking from like a project management standpoint that is quite encompassing. So um drilling down to product software development lifecycle, right, which is essentially a subset of this project lifecycle. When we some of the articles we're going to discuss today within the software development lifecycle are subsets of the initiation phase. You see things that happen and you can see that this is a subset of the initiation phase of a typical project management lifecycle. You would look at things that happens within a software development lifecycle and realize this is a subset of the planning phase, and this is the execution phase, and then things that you're monitoring and controlling and closer. So I'd say let's look at this from software development lifecycle, and then what is software development lifecycle, right? Software development lifecycle is the process of planning, writing, and modifying software. It encompasses a set of procedures, methods, and techniques used in software development. The software development lifecycle is important because it helps ensure that the right people are involved in the right activity at the right time. Now, we're talking about roles. Don't forget the topic for today is roles in a project lifecycle. So there are activities that would happen, and then there are certain people, there are certain techniques you need, there are certain procedures that should happen within this. Now, in a typical software development lifecycle, if you look at some literature or some text or something, you might find a bit disparity with what I have here, but at the end of the ultimately, it's the same thing. A few things just changes, right? For example, for some text or some literature, whatever, you'd see after requirement gathering, you see things like requirement analysis. But for me, within the requirement gathering phase, you're analyzing, right? And then when you are gathering requirement, this is essentially a subset of the initiation phase, right? When you piggyback on a typical project management lifecycle that talks about initiation, planning, execution, managing, and controlling, you see that the requirement gathering phase, a number of things happen. Yeah, I'm going to discuss all of that. So for me, I group this life cycle right into six. There's the requirement gathering phase, there's the design phase, there could be the system design phase, look at system architecture design, and then you look at even like the product design, physically like your mock-ups, wireframes, your typical Jira designer, all that stuff. And then there's the implementation phase, right, within this life cycle where the software engineers, like we have a couple of software engineers, they get their hands dirty. That is the execution, which is a subset of um, project management lifecycle. So at the implementation phase, you already see that you're executing here. And then there's monitoring and controlling where you're verifying what is being implemented and testing. You're basically monitoring and controlling them. And then there's deployment where you push the product, and then we're looking at close out. But then the difference here is that most products, like if you look at whatever you look at your phone, there are various products you have there. There's support and maintenance because you have to keep supporting some of these functionalities. You have to keep rolling out new features, enhancing some capabilities and all that. So, but then this is a structured, typical life cycle of software development life cycle for a typical product that you build in today's market. Now, these phases, I'll talk about each of the phases, the requirement phase, requirement gathering. So the requirement gathering phase involves gathering, analyzing, and documenting what the software system needs to accomplish. This includes functional requirement, what the system should do, all right? Because you have a concept, I want to build a human resource management solution, all right? What do you need? All right, there's the technical side of things where when you would have, from a product standpoint, where you would have understood the requirement from a product standpoint or from the customer standpoint. And then there's the technical standpoint where you need a system guy or a system architect to actually, that's where we talk about functional and non-functional requirements. You look at security, the usability constraint, performance, and those kind of requirements. That is basically what happens at the requirement gathering phase. There are techniques in gathering requirements, and you can research further on some of these things, but this is basically, in summary, what happens at the requirement gathering phase. You're gathering requirement, what the system needs, what the product is going to look like, what functionalities, what your users expect, because these days you build, it's a customer-centric approach that is adopted when you're building a product. You build with customer in mind. So you're constantly interacting with the customer and trying to understand what they need. So that's on the side of the non-functional, and then you look at the functionalities. What features do you need, right? Depending on the product you're building, right? And then there's the design phase, right? What happens in the design phase of a typical software development lifecycle is you're creating the blueprint for how the system will be built, right? This includes system architecture, talked about database designs, user interface, mockups, technical specification that guides developer, right? All this happens within the design phase, right? And then, after you doing all of this, there's you actually then implementing, right? The actual coding and the development phase where programmers write the source code based on the design specifications to create the working software application. And then after implementation, there's testing, right? Systematically checking the software works correctly and meets requirement. Now, when you're writing a typical user story for certain functionality, there's something called acceptance criteria. You have your QA who specify, all right, test cases. So for every functionality, you have to test against your test cases. So that happens. All right, so it's a phase within a typical software development lifecycle. So you have to verify that this functionality that's been released works well, and all your test cases or acceptance criteria, it passes all your acceptance criteria. And then there's deployment where you either release the product, all right, either you push to production, things like that, or you either push to customers. There are different phases. There's the A/B testing phase where you can release to a specific set of users or eventually push to like the larger market. Different companies have different approach of deployment, right? And then last but not the least is support and maintenance. Like your car, for example, when you purchase a car and you're driving, you have to service it regularly and you need people to actually manage the process of servicing your car. You as a driver, you have to drive to where oil is changed. It's the same thing with software product, right? There's some functionalities that needs enhancement, right? You need to scale up your servers or and stuff like that to maybe accommodate your volume of transactions and stuff like that. Spin up additional. So this support and maintenance constantly happens, right? You're supporting the existing functionalities, the existing infrastructure that houses this product while building new ones. So this is a continuous process. So ongoing activities after deployment include monitoring system performance, you're fixing bugs because things are going to break, implementing updates and enhancing an enhancement, providing user support, and ensuring continuous system reliability. That's basically what happens at the support and maintenance phase. We're talking about roles within this life cycle, right? These are some roles that I have listed here. Well, I'm sure we're quite familiar with some of these roles, right? And some of them include, depending on different organizations have different needs for these roles. Some of these roles overlap each other. So some companies may not really need, but typically these are all the roles that is involved in a typical software development project slash life cycle. And I'm going to tie each of these roles to what happens um that life cycle that I just um explained earlier. There's project manager, it's a role within this cycle. There's business analyst, there's software developer slash engineers. Like we have mobile apps, web apps, some are front end, some are back end. These are different roles within software engineer, right? There's UI UX designer, there's the quality assurance, QA, tester engineer, there's DevOps engineer, there's product owner, there's Scrum Master, and then there's product manager as well. Sorry. So yeah, there's product manager. Now, next is to actually describe what each of these people do within a typical, within, sorry, I'm trying to shift. Yeah. So next is to actually explain what each of these people, what their roles and responsibility are within a typical software development lifecycle. Project manager oversees the entire project lifecycle. He manages timeline, resources, and budget. All right, coordinates across all phases. When we talk about all phases, from the requirement gathering phase to the system design, you need a project manager, right? Or if I piggyback on like a typical project management life cycle, at the initiation phase, you need a project manager where you're already conceiving, oh, we want to build this product, right? And where you're doing your feasibility study, your viability study, looking at your what are some of the artifacts of the initiation phase, things like when you're working on your skip my mind, but when I remember, but bottom line is that the initiation phase, you need project manager from start to finish, right? Coordinates all phases, manages stakeholder communication because you're going to have to deal with people, right? There's internal stakeholder, there's internal stakeholder. It's the responsibility of a project manager to coordinate and manage communication with these people. It tracks progress of work and ensures deliverables are met on schedule, mitigates risk and resolves issue. This is the typical responsibility of a project manager within a software development life cycle. Now, there's also the business analyst whose primary focus is requirement. In the requirement phase, elicits, document, and validate business requirement. There's something called PRD and BRD, product requirement document, business requirement document, right? These documents are put together most at the requirement gathering phase, right? For companies that pretty much work on Agile and Scrum as a framework, this is a continuous thing, but like, you guys get what I'm saying. But yeah, there's business analyst who primary focus is requirement phase, documents and validates. Typical business analyst works on things like PRD, BRD, understands business needs and gathers requirement, work on a requirement document along the lines of business needs, right? Every single product, the aim of every single product is for you when you push out a product to get return on investment. So business analysis has to ensure that the business needs aligns with the product needs and typically translates to return on investment to the owners of this product or to the investors. So he or she bridges communication between stakeholders and technical teams throughout the project, ensuring requirements are properly translated into technical specification. There's also the software engineer whose core contribution is implementation phase. Writes codes and builds the software based on design specification. Don't forget, there's a UI UX person who comes up with a design or a mock-up and stuff and say, this is what this product should look like. This is where the functionality should be placed. This is key things from also a user standpoint. Also participate in design phase for technical input and support testing phase by fixing identified bugs. It's typical role of software engineer. There's also the UI UX, primarily active in design phase, creates user interface, mockups, wireframes, and user experience flow. defines how users will interact with the system and ensure design meets usability requirement. There's also the quality assurance tester or engineer. He or she leads the verification/testing phase. Don't forget, for every single functionality that is built, it has to be tested. Something called acceptance criteria, right? You have to test against this acceptance criteria. It is the job, if the QA does not sign up on a piece of functionality, then it has to go back to the software engineer to actually fix or to rebuild or to remodel or whatever. So design test cases, executes various testing methods, functional, there's different testing methods. There's functional, there's unit test, there's regression. A number of these falls within the purview of quality assurance guy. Functional integration performance identifies defects and validates that the software meets acceptance criteria before any functionality is deployed. They work closely with the development team to maintain quality. Like the name quality assurance, it has to ensure that this product or this functionality meets quality. There's also the DevOps engineer who focuses on deployment and support as maintenance phase, manages deployment pipelines, CI/CD, infrastructure setup, continuous integration, and CI/CD deployment, monitoring the system reliability post deployment. Somebody who is a DevOps engineer who introduced himself. There's also a product owner active throughout the requirement and design phase, defines product vision, prioritizes features, manages product backlog, and serves as primary stakeholder representative, ensuring that product meets business objective. The Scrum Master facilitates agile processes across all phases, removing impediments, coaches the team on agile best practices, facilitates ceremonies like daily stand-ups, sprint planning sessions, sprint review session, and ensures that the team follows Scrum methodology effectively throughout the development lifecycle. He or she also shields the team from external distraction, right? Product manager oversees the strategic direction and success of the product throughout the entire software development lifecycle, acts as the bridge between business strategy and technical execution, ensuring that product delivers value to both users and the organization. Now, like I said earlier, companies are crashing some of these roles because some roles are overlapping each other in terms of responsibility. Some are merging this responsibility, but in all, these are all the roles that are available within a typical software development life cycle. This is activity metric. I just put this together to show roles and in each of the phases how active they are. Project manager is very active at the requirement phase, like I said. Initiation, the project manager is there. But then the project manager's contribution at the design phase is pretty much minimal. So there's medium because it's a thing of like the UI UX guy who does the design, and then if there's like the system architect design that's done by the system architect. And then there's the implementation phase where he just pretty much coordinates. The real guy here is the software engineer, and then there's testing phase. The project manager's role is quite minimal. And then at the deployment phase is quite high, and then support and maintenance is minimal. There's BA whose requirement and requirement gathering. Don't forget I talked about PRD, BRD. So business analyst at the requirement phase is quite high. The design phase is minimal. At the implementation phase is low. At the testing phase is medium. At the deployment phase is low. BA has business with deployment, and then medium and support and maintenance. And then there's software engineers who requirement is pretty medium. Design is medium, implementation is high, testing is medium, deployment is medium, and support is high because most support is technical in nature, so software engineer has to fix or provide certain support. Right? Same with UI UX, is DevOps engineer, product owner, Scrum, product manager. For all these roles, this is the activity level metrics across software development lifecycle against these roles. I cannot read all of them, but I'll just move. So next is phase by phase activity summary. All right. At the requirement phase, most active is product manager, product owner, business analyst, project manager. All right. We have product manager who defines vision and strategy, the requirement phase. Because at that point, you're still defining, don't forget the requirement is a subset of the initiation phase and the planning phase of a typical project management lifecycle. So you're still even defining the vision. What are we trying to achieve? How do we achieve this? And then you're putting some documents together, right? And so the product manager is critical here. These roles are very critical. The requirement phase, which is the first phase of a typical software development lifecycle, which is a subset of the standard project management lifecycle, right? So there's product manager defines vision and strategy. There's product owner prioritizes feature and manages backlog. Business analyst elicits document and requirement. Project manager that coordinates stakeholders and every activity. There's the design phase. Most active is the UI UX designer and the product owner. The UI UX designer creates mockup and user experience flow. Product owner validates this design, right? Because the product owner is the voice of the customer in a typical product team. He represents the customer's needs. So he has to validate that this design you worked on is user-friendly. All right. It's 2-3 clicks away for me to get certain things done. It's not cumbersome. There are some applications or some products that you hop on, you don't even know what to do. But so user experience is critical. You need to think from a user standpoint. You need to know the user persona. What kind of users are you building for? There are products that you know that 60, 70-year-old retirees are not using. So if you're building and targeting young Gen Z and young people, young adults, you understand that it's easy for them to decipher like the workflow. So when you're designing product where you target those kind of markets, the design is different. Recently, I was working on a product where we're building for people, old civil servants in the ministry, like the kind of people who work in civil service, right? So if you're building a product for those kind of people to use, you're picturing a bit older people. So you need to come up with a mock-up or design that is quite extremely user-friendly, that because they don't have like the mental capacity to start deciphering or discovering. So you need to make the user experience quite extremely friendly. So UI UX designer creates mockup. So why I'm emphasizing on this is you do not just design because you can just put these elements on Figma together, right? There is a philosophy behind designs, and most times companies who want to hire, if you're putting yourself out there for like technicians and stuff like that, people need to see that you're not just an illustrator per se. You don't just pick elements. There's a philosophy behind your design. You understand the market, the users you're designing for. You don't just design, right? So there's UI UX design part. There's product owner who validates this design against business requirement, and then supporting roles provide inputs and feedback. Now, this at the implementation phase, most active is software developer and Scrum Master. All right, software developer writes codes and build features. Scrum Master facilitates development process and removes impediment, especially if you're working within the Scrum framework, right? If you're building using Agile as a methodology, there are different frameworks, right? If you're using Kanban, for example, or Crystal or some other frameworks, you don't need you don't need a Scrum Master for a typical Kanban if you're using Kanban as an agile framework, right? So Scrum Master facilitates development process and removes impediment, and other roles provide support and clarification as needed at the implementation phase. Then there's testing phase where it's a QA and a product owner thing. The QA tester executes test plan and identifies defect. Product owner validates functionality meets acceptance criteria. All right. And developers fix identified bugs. This is basically what happens at the testing phase. And then there's the deployment, which is the DevOps engineer, product manager, and product owner. DevOps engineer manages deployment infrastructure and processes. He's the one who manages all that system that the application sits on and runs. And then there's a project manager who coordinates go live activities, and then there's the product who oversees launch strategy, right? Then within the support and maintenance phase, there's DevOps engineer, software developer, product manager. DevOps engineer monitors system performance and reliability. You need to be sure. Yeah, things are not breaking because you don't have like your servers running as they should be running. Your pipelines are up and running as well. So software developer implements bugs, fixes, and enhancement. And then product manager analyzes metrics. You have to track certain metrics within the support and maintenance phase. And this is job of product manager. There are tools using tracking these metrics to understand how your product is performing in the market. And then there's key collaboration point, right, for these roles in a typical software development lifecycle, right? Um, there's the there's the cross-phase collaboration, the PM to all roles, that's project manager to all other roles. There's the continuous collaboration and communication. You have to keep coordinating, managing um, resources, managing timelines, organizing, coordinating. So you basically, as project manager, you collaborate with every other person because you need like your DevOps engineers to understand what is happening here. You need to coordinate with your software engineers. You need to speak with your product owners and every single and your QA, right? So there's that continuous coordination and communication. You're managing communication and stuff. So there's also the product owner and the BA at the requirement phase. They collaborate effectively, yeah, at the requirement validation and clarification phase. There's the developer and the QA at the bug fixing and feature validation because the software engineer builds different functionality, right? Depending on what was assigned to you within a sprint or whatever. And your QA has to validate that what you worked on within a sprint meets your acceptance criteria, has passed their test cases. All right. So there's a huge collaboration between software engineers, developers, and QA. And then there's designer to developer at the implementation of design specification. When you work on these beautiful designs of Figma and stuff, somebody has to carry that design. Most times, maybe a front end engineer is pretty good with CSS and all that stuff, has to translate that design to what users would see and interact with. All right. So your designer and developer, and then there's that cross ideas. You cannot just design in silo. You have to have your engineers look at what you're doing because you don't also, there's some very complex design, right? From an implementation standpoint, I'm not a software engineer, but I work with engineers who will tell you that this thing you design is not feasible. It's not, the implementation is not feasible. So you need to also tweak and adjust your design and stuff. So there's that collaboration between designers and developer against implementing of designs and specification. There's then the DevOps and the developer collaboration. Your deployment and infrastructure support. This application actually sits and run on this infrastructure that these DevOps guys have set up, right? So you need there's that collaboration between them because they need to pretty much understand what you built and like define resources and how they will sit on the infrastructure. So there's this Scrum Master and the development team. The development team is pretty much everybody, all right? Because you are managing, you're facilitating process facilitation throughout the development phase. Things like your sprint planning session, you're doing it with your software engineers, your QAs, and all that. All right. You're not just facilitating yourself. All right. So you're facilitating things like sprint planning session, your daily stand up, your retrospect sessions, and stuff like that. So there's that collaboration Scrum Master against like the entire team and every other role. And and then summary of all of this is each role is very critical to project success for you to push product out there. Each of these roles is very critical. All right. Like I said, for some companies, the roles are there. Like these things has to happen. For some companies, for example, in my previous company, I was hired as a project manager product. So I was pretty much doing the job of a project manager and a product manager. I was writing user stories. I was working on PRDs for like new epics and stuff like that. So So you might find a situation, but what I'm saying is all of these things that has been specified that are tied to this role, they are very critical. Without them happening, it's difficult to actually have a successful product out there. All right. All of these roles, right? But sometimes either for cost cutting or managing of resources, companies just sort of like merge these roles. But every single thing explained here has to happen within a typical software development lifecycle for you to push out a viable product, right? So each role is critical for project success. Then collaboration and communication is key. You cannot work by yourself. A software engineer needs a product designer. Product designer is designing for a software engineer. Software engineer needs a QA tester who's going to say, oh, this product has passed this test case. Because I mean, most times software engineers run tests by themselves, but it makes more sense for somebody who didn't write the code to actually run some of these functionality tests. All right. So collaboration, communication is what makes all of this happen. So it's a key soft skill for everybody, whether you are a product manager, whether you're a software engineer, whether you're a DevOps engineer, you have to be able to collaborate effectively in anything you find yourself, and communication is key. Now, roles clarity improves efficiency and accountability. It's important for you to know what your role is, what your responsibility are, because so if you do not understand, like I said, there are organizations where some of these rules are overlapping each other. All right, you could be hired for one thing and then asked to do something else. Clarify and ask. All right, if you're hired as a project manager and you're being asked to write user stories, work on PRDs and stuff like that, it is part of your responsibility. So on getting that clarity is very important because it is easy. That is what drives efficiency, and that is what makes room for accountability. It's easy to say, oh, this is who did this, and this is who is accountable for this. So also, don't forget, this is an Emigr8 section where we are trying to understand this role so that we can better position ourselves for the global market, right? We're all trying to japa. So these roles are considered for both exceptional promise and exceptional talent within technician. So you can actually carve out a niche, pick something, be very good and efficient in it, and then you are just have like a digital footprint and do stuff, right? Put yourself out there, whatever you are, whether you're a QA tester, whether you're a UI UX designer, whether you're a Scrum Master, project manager, product manager, have a digital footprint, write, do things, put yourself out there, right? This is what sets you apart, right? And then contribute to as many projects as possible, all right? Take credit for things you've done. So these are what sets you apart and puts you on the right path or track for being considered either as an exceptional promise or exceptional talent, depending on how long you've been on the game. So with that, I've come to the end of my session, and I'd like to say thank you, and I'll take questions also. Um, just if you look at the link down there, I have like a free mentorship session where I mentor people. You can, in mentoring club, you can actually look me up if you want better clarity, because an hour is usually not enough for these conversations. Yeah, so many concepts, right, underneath this software development life cycle, underneath the frameworks, underneath the methodologies and stuff that we cannot cover in an hour. So you can totally reach out to me, can make out time, book a time in my free mentorship session thing, and then in the mentoring club, and then I can make out time and can discuss career concepts that you think are quite difficult and you want to talk about. So yeah, thank you, and I'll take questions right now.
All right, thank you very much, sir. You've really done justice to the topic. Well done on that. There are a couple of questions in the chat box. Even though I know you've taught some of them from your discussion, but I would just like you to maybe throw some more light on some of the questions, yeah, in the chat box. Yeah. Adego case also raising his hand. Mary is raising her hand. I think they have one or two questions to ask, maybe they can go ahead uh, while we take a look at the questions in the chat box. All right.
Oh, yeah, that's perfect. Yeah.
Good evening.
Yes, good evening.
My question is just in your own personal opinion, for with regards to real world projects, what role would you say tends to be the most maybe challenging to manage?
Before I answer that question, I'll say what role, what's your role?
I'm a DevOps infrastructure engineer.
Okay. I thought you were maybe a product manager or something. That's why you asked. So you're asking the most challenging role to manage, right, in a typical product team. Um, not to, I don't want to sort of like, I'd say it depends on individual. I've worked with so many people. I've worked with Nigerians, I've worked with people across like Canadians, Europeans, I've worked with Africans, South Africans, I've worked with so many people. I don't think it is a role thing. I rather think it's a person thing, right? So while I was working, when I worked with HP, I was managing a scrum team of about 11 people, I think six engineers, two QAs, and a couple of other, right? And the most difficult person that I had to ask that he should be kicked out of, I wanted him out of the team, was a QA, was a QA. So I think in terms of management, I don't think it's a role thing. I rather think it's a person thing. There are people that are just difficult. There are people that are just difficult. Like that they just have, they are just difficult in nature. All right. But then as a project manager, you need to look for ways to actually manage these people. Right. Whatever you find yourself depending, right, you need to look for ways. So it's not the person, it's not the role thing, right? I've had software engineers that are very difficult. Like you ask them, "Yeah, we need you to implement this thing." They are pushing back and kicking and saying, no, it's not possible. So it's not a role thing. But like the most challenging person in my entire career, like I said, is the QA. That's why I had to remember him instantly. I'd never met him. And then the funniest thing is he was a very smart person. I guess that's what got to him. Right. But sometimes you need an efficient and hardworking person. That's what I've realized over the years that you cannot hinge on, oh, he's good at his job and then he has a poor attitude to work, because he had a terrible attitude to work. Terrible. He's an exceptionally smart guy, but he had a terrible attitude to work. So that's how I answer that question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Mary, you can go.
Okay, good evening.
Yeah.
I'm continuing. Okay, so my question is regards to time zone, because I'm imagining if you are working in the IT section, you can work with people from different parts of the world. So have you ever faced any difficulty when it came to working with people in different time zones, and how did you handle it?
So I work Pacific time zone currently. PST,
Sorry, what
Pacific
did you
time.
say?
I work Pacific time zone currently, Pacific PST, Pacific
Okay.
Standard Time. This is like early hours for like my manager in the US. She lives in West Coast, and that's it. So yeah, working multiple time zone. In my previous company, I was managing three scrum team. One was based in India. India is like 3 4 hours ahead of us. So working multiple time zone, I now know all the time zone, majority of the time zones in the world, right? India is like they're like 3 hours ahead of us. There's the Eastern time zone that is within the US and Canada, and they are 3 hours behind Pacific time. Pacific time is 5 hours ahead of us, and then there's the mountain time. So you need to know all of this. Now there are also two. There's something I use. If you look at my work laptop, is right beside me. Um, iPhone, for example, has multiple um, time there, you can set up like different countries time. I was working with somebody, I've had to work with somebody that lives in Australia. They're like, I think Australia, they're like, we're in today, they're like in tomorrow. You get, so, so I've had to like join meetings around 11, 12 p.m. Nigerian time, right? And then sometimes I'm usually not in Nigeria. So it makes it easy. Like I just came back
Okay.
from, I just, I was in Canada for a while. It was really easy while I was in Canada because my manager was just 3 hours ahead of me. It was so easy. And she also enjoyed it because according to her, she didn't have to feel guilty, like sending me things to get done around certain times. So, but yeah, it's flexibility. You have to be flexible. You need to understand these time zones. You need to be open to adjustments. You need to sleep, right? Um, I sleep late. My standard sleeping time is like 2, 3 a.m. Nigerian time. And then when I'm in Nigeria, I still wake up as early as 6 a.m. because I have to go to the gym and then come back and do a couple of things. So my body system has just adjusted. Your body will adjust. That's one thing I'll tell you. All right. So yeah, I don't know if I answered that right. So I'll take the questions in the chat box. How do project roles typically evolve from initiation to closure in real world setting? Um, I mean, it's like I said, initiation phase is basically where you conceive the idea. A number of things. There's something called artifacts of the initiation phase. There are things you need to see. I used to know these things, but it's like I've forgotten. There are things you need to do at the initiation phase and understand that, oh, what we are working on. There are certain artifacts you see. Artifacts are like output, right? For example, how can't I remember everyone artifacts of initiation? Work breakdown structure is in the planning phase. The schedule plan document is in the planning phase. The initiation phase has um how have I forgotten these things? I think I need to brush up again. But yeah, there are artifacts of the initiation phase. All right, there are documents you need to see. All right, and you know that we're working on the initiation phase. At the point of the design, you already know that you are in the planning phase. And then if you're working in like a Scrum framework where you're building in increments, design are done where you're building in increments and in like iterations. For every single sprint, you basically go through that loop of initiation, planning, execution, because designs are being churned in increments, functionalities are built in increments, they're releasing in increments. So it's not really a straightforward thing. If I was going to talk about this, I need to explain it from the waterfall methodology for it to make sense. Because if I explain it like this, it will look like a straight thing. Yes, it's a straight thing if you are using waterfall methodology, but most companies build with agile. So they build in increments. All of these things happen in a loop or in a cycle. Design, build, deploy, push out. Next sprint, you're doing that cycle. And so yeah, the initiation, basically when you do the things you're doing, you're working on things like your PRD, or in the initiation phases are all artifacts of the initiation phase and stuff like that, right? When you are looking at your design, schedule, document, plan, budget, you know that these are all artifacts of your planning phase. When you're writing your reports weekly, monthly, these are artifacts of the execution phase, and then you're doing your closing out note and stuff. Those are artifacts of this. So basically, when you're doing these things, you're seeing this output within each of these phases. You know, that is basically how project evolves. A typical software project. Now you're doing your requirement gathering, you're documenting this thing, you're working on your PRD, you're at the requirement gathering phase, you're asking questions, you're interviewing prospective customers, you're asking questions, you're doing your research. That's pretty much requirement. All right. The design, you're working on design, system architect design. Right? That's the design phase. You're implementing. That's basically how it evolves. You're writing codes, you're building, you're running sprints, you're checking functionalities, right? You're deploying, you're pushing to either staging, production. These things are happening. So that's pretty much how it happens within software. What strategies can help clarify overlapping responsibility among team members during communication? That's the communication. Very important. Ask questions, right? Whoever hired you, whoever brought you, ask questions. I see this person. What am I supposed to do? What is this person supposed to do? I've been in similar situation. Ask your manager. Communication, that's it. All right. I feel like I'm doing this thing and this person is doing it as well. Okay, you can stop doing this. This person is going to be handling this going forward. So simple. You can have it, like I said, I was hired as a project manager product. I had like people who were hired as product managers, and we had to collaborate, right? Different epics were assigned and stuff. So communication is one of the strategy. Ask questions to your senior management, to your set up one-on-ones, ask questions. How does the role of project manager differ from that of a product owner across the project? The funny thing is, I had a feeling somebody was going to ask this. So, product management, what the person asks, project manager. Project manager basically coordinates task. He coordinates and just handles things. Owns timeline. Project manager defines timeline, resources. What are we assigning to this? How many engineers do we need? We need two, three QAs here. Manages resources, right? If you need anything within the team, project manager, you organize this work. We're taking this, we're handling this, we're doing this. He manages stakeholder communication, both internal, external, and then there are risks associated to every project, right? It is the sole responsibility of the project manager to identify this risk, right? Plan for this risk and put in measures to mitigate this risk. These are some of the responsibilities of the project manager. While the product manager owns the product backlog, right? If you've studied for Scrum, I'm talking textbook now, product owner owns the backlog, right? He decides which functionality goes into the sprint or which ticket will be taken into the sprint. He manages the entire backlog. Backlog is a composition of bugs, tickets, new capabilities. That is actually what makes up product backlog. All right. So product manager owns that. He's the voice of the customer in the team. He says, no, this functionality, I don't like it. It doesn't look like what I want to see as a customer. I like to keep the time is 5:59. How does the role of a project manager? So I hope I've answered that. Can you share an example where unclear role led to project delay or failure and how it happened? I'd say this, it'll be in like projects that I have handled or I've been a part of. Time is 6 o'clock. I'll leave that one. What tool or techniques do you recommend for mapping and assigning roles? Most companies have like standard organograms that define roles. This is here, this sits here, right? So there's a manager, like somebody, an operations guy who defines this, or project manager most times is the one who defines this in a typical team, right? We need the product owner, we need the product manager, we need a program manager. There's program manager that manages project managers across if you're working on like an enterprise product that has multiple scrum teams, right? Depends on the framework. If you're looking at SAFe, you're looking at SAFe as a framework, which is a methodology. That one defines roles already. Like Scrum, for example, defines role. Scrum has Scrum Master. If you're looking at Scrum as a framework, that already defines role for a typical team, right? Scrum as a framework says you need a Scrum Master, a product manager, and a development team, and engineers. QAs are termed as engineers. So these are just standards and like your software engineers and stuff. And then product owner does a number of things. So yeah, tools or techniques you recommend for mapping and assigning roles effectively in each project. So the framework defines role depending on the framework. If you're using Kanban, SAFe, some of these roles have been defined depending on the framework you're using to build or the team ways of working. All right. There's also the organization one that decides certain things. So yeah, I don't want us to overrun the time. It's 6:01, so I don't know if I answered everything, but I'd like for us to end as soon as possible.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for sharing your insight. You've really done justice to the topic. And I believe we are very, very satisfied with all the insight that you've shared with us. Yeah, this session is recorded, and if you need the recorded version of this session, you can reach out to me on Slack, on Bincom Dev Center, or you can also reach out to me on Bincom Tech Network. And Mr. Baristas, I think it would be nice if you can share your LinkedIn LinkedIn so that we can connect with you also.
I will
Yeah.
think I'll put that in the chat box right now. But like I
All
said,
right. Yeah, that would be really, really helpful. We would like to connect with you.
read
And
the in the
okay,
chat box.
yeah, you wanted to say something. You can just
I was going to say
go
that
ahead.
if you need like additional clarity, I'm currently running like free mentorship sessions. And both sign up on Mentoring Club and book a time, and but just be specific on what you want to talk about and what you want to get clarity on. If it's within what I know, I'll totally hop on a call and discuss with you and help. That's what I do basically. So yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. I don't know if you have any one last message for us before we call it a day.
Um I'd say as techies, own your role, like whatever you say you are doing. If you're a product manager, if you're a project manager, if you're a DevOps engineer, if you're a software engineer, own your role, know what is required of you. It's very important, and do your job well, put in your utmost best in doing your job. And if you find yourself in a space where what's required of you, ask questions. Always communicate clearly, ask questions, and you should be good. That's my final one. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's it.
Yeah, it does. It does make sense. Thank you very much, sir. I would like to have you some other time. Thank you guys for joining today's session. And I just want to leave us with this word. Understanding rules in the project lifecycle is key to delivering successful, well-managed projects from start to finish. Okay. So thank you guys. See you again next week. Yeah, do have a lovely weekend.
Bye, guys.
Bye.